Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining Startup Impact Summit. Today we are super excited to have two aspiring growth marketers with us to walk us through a lot of terminologies you want to understand. And I don't want to keep you much too much time. And without further ado, I would like to hand over the stage to our moderator today, Darren, to kickstart the session. Please give round of applause.
Good morning, or afternoon, or evening. My name is Darren. I work at referralcandy.com and at candybar.co. I work on e-commerce. I'm a growth marketer and a startup. And today we have Jacqueline from Easyship. I'm going to pass it over to Jacqueline to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Ostrov. I'm head of growth at Easyship. I can give you a bit of background of my background if you want.
Yep. So why don't Jacqueline? Sorry, I'm not a great moderator. Shall we start by? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience in marketing and in growth marketing?
Sure. Thanks for the question. My background has always been focused around the digital space and finding scalable solutions for companies of all sizes. Out of university, I focused in a global advisory firm in Chicago called Grant Thornton in Consulting, with a focus on building brands and net promoters within companies to drive upsells and just equitable growth from internal companies. Then afterwards, I moved to New York, where I was lucky enough to work with industry leaders at innovative companies like WeWork and then Shutterstock, and most recently Google before coming to Easyship in Hong Kong.
So about 6 years of marketing experience. Is that about accurate?
Yeah, about 9 years.
Will you tell us a quick introduction about what Easyship is and the size of the company, what you guys are trying to do, who your target customers are?
Sure. So Easyship is a global shipping software built to enable borderless commerce. What we do at our core is we're an enabler. We connect merchants with their consumers all over the world. We also connect couriers directly to e-commerce platforms like Shopify, BigCommerce, Magento, as well as more localized brands like Shopmatic. And then we connect fulfillment centers with different companies at different sizes of their e-commerce or crowdfunding growth. The verticals we work with tend to vary. We basically deliver goods of any type. So we can work with merchants that sell e-bikes to apparel to luggage. We even work with a lot of board games and office goods. Basically, if you're a business that needs to make a shipment, Easyship can help.
And if I'm correct, e-commerce and logistics for e-commerce has been a growing market in the last couple of years, but especially in the last 3 months.
Sure.
So all right, so that's where you are. That's kind of a little bit about your background. So for those of us who are maybe a little bit unfamiliar, will you tell us a little bit more about what growth marketing is in general, and then we'll get to asking you about what you do as a head of growth marketing.
Sure. That's a really good question because I believe growth marketing is defined differently at different businesses. I've had different variations of growth titles throughout my career. And I think it really depends on the maturity of the business and the business's market penetration. For example, when you look at companies such as Google or Facebook, growth teams tend to sit within the data or analytics divisions of the org and focus on hypothesis building and testing to really implement ways to drive conversion rate optimizations. When you're working with scaled audiences of, tens of hundreds of thousands of even daily users, even driving a single percentage digit increment in usability or purchases can drive millions in sales. So that tends to be a very exciting aspect. And then as you go further down the funnel or like the size of an organization, it varies. So like if you go to larger companies that are looking to potentially grow user adoption in new markets, typically growth roles sit within paid acquisition teams. So they're always going to be directly tied to data analytics team members, right? Because you can't have growth marketing without a really strong data backset or backbone of an organization. But you'll tend to see more specialists focusing on paid channels like SEM or display, potentially affiliate. You can oftentimes see SEO and content depending on organization's marketing mix. So anything that really drives last click attributions, where you see higher value and direct correlated metrics, then they'll typically sit within a growth funnel. What growth looks like at a startup or an early stage company, much like Easyship, we define it very much in layering the fundamentals. So we have the same type of team structure that you would see at a larger org, but our deliverables are a lot different. So right now we're layering in best practices to set up structure for scale, and maybe a little bit less focus on like the paid optimizations and A/B testing that you'll see at more scaled organizations.
So it sounds like depending on the company, the scale of the company, the maturity of the company, and also the number of resources available to the company, growth marketing can be defined in different ways. So we're going to linger a little bit more here. It sounds like one of the words that keep coming up is metrics. Another word that keep coming up is data. So for me, for somebody who's not so familiar, will you explain the difference between data-driven marketing or growth marketing or just marketing, digital marketing in general? There are a lot of terms being bandied around. I'm not really sure what all these terms mean, or even if they mean the same thing. So what's your thought on this?
Yeah, it's also a good question. So I think when you take a step back, the core to growth marketing is always going to be a hybrid between executionally delivering marketing tactics, but also tying it into analytics. So oftentimes what you'll see is, key KPIs, which are key performance indicators, which every company will start as their benchmark. Companies like Easyship, when I joined them, I'll restart that. I'm sorry, guys.
No worries.
Cut that feelings. So the core to growth marketing, it's always a hybrid approach between executional marketing tactics as well as analytics. So when you start diving into what marketing means or what growth means, it's always you focus on a few key KPIs. Of them, you'll always look at CAC. If you CAC, so cost of acquisition, across all your paid channels, and you want to make sure the ratio is always healthy to your LTV or lifetime value of a consumer. Typically, how you calculate an LTV, if you don't have, a lot of data, or maybe it's not a high-level investment for your company, it'll tend to be a benchmark around 1/3 of what a customer's lifetime value is for your company is like a target CAC or target CPA, cost per acquisition. So those are like usually the health metrics. Then you look at things like conversion rates, which are always really important. If you're an app, you might look at daily active users or weekly active users, depending on your scale. And you're always going to have a couple key KPIs for health. So when you look at performance marketing, you always look at healthy CPAs, healthy LTVs. And then for growth as a whole, you want to make sure that your conversion rates are good in regards to your investment, and also that the activation is higher than the churn of your company.
So that's a really great summary of some of the key KPIs that you worry about and you think about, and also especially applicable to whether you're an e-commerce or a website, or whether you're an app. So speaking as a growth marketer, are there a set of key metrics that are written down somewhere that you focus on? How do you find these key metrics? Do you work with your team to say, hey, these are the key metrics? We've identified that as soon as we can flip the switch on these metrics, revenue will go up. Or is it a matter of, hey, we should test these, and then we realize, oh, these three don't work. It's this fourth one that works. Tell us a little bit about the process of identifying these key metrics.
Sure. I think they're the same actually across any type of organization. So when you look at a performance marketing team and you look at maybe the person in charge of your paid program, their key metric is always going to be cost per acquisition. And their cost per acquisition is always going to be a variable of the LTV. So if you're maybe say your customer value is something like $100 and you see them spending $30 a month and there's going to be a $90 revenue after 3 months, and for you a healthy retention rate is 3 months, then your target CPA is going to be anywhere under $30, right? Ideally, when you look at a healthy business model, you want someone to at least stay for 6 months, and you would calculate the lifetime value from that based on like a cohort of the customer you acquire in that audience. So I realize I'm getting kind of technical, so I would just focus on CPA if you're looking at a paid plan. If you're using an own channel for acquisition, so say for you, email is a really good acquisition channel. So you might have an audience of 1 million, or if you're a smaller company, maybe 200,000 contacts. And for you, even activating 1% of that drives potentially 10% of your customer acquisition for that year. So focusing on click-through rate and then activation rate would be key for those metrics. So own channels, you're not looking at spend. So in summary, I would focus on CPA for paid channels and conversion rate for own channels.
And of course, these are very important rates which are tied to revenue.
Sure.
And of course, the ratio between expending effort and receiving returns. So have you discovered this? So is growth marketing simply just applying a formula to whatever situation you find yourself in? Oh, okay, if I'm doing an app and I'm using email, then these are the metrics that I care about. This is the percentage I need to get to. If I'm doing if I'm doing performance marketing, this is the CAC that I should aim for. This is the CLTV I need to aim for. Is it a matter of applying a well-tread and trodden formula? And if so, where do I find this magical formula list? Or does it need to be adapted? Does it need to change?
Sure.
I understand that right now you're working in a B2B e-commerce logistics provider platform sort of thing. Is that different from your previous experience at different companies as well?
Sure. I think as marketers, we tend to experience this idea of like cognitive dissonance, right? So when you join marketing, you're like, wow, I am the most creative person. And even myself, right? And like working at companies like Google or Shutterstock that really pride themselves on their creative differentiation, you tend to position yourself as like a creative. And I think that's something you have to adjust as you start looking at scalable solutions. As we get smarter as marketers and as we have tools that become more automated, we have to really leverage that for insights around end users. So for marketers, there isn't this like 1+1 formula that drives healthy user acquisition. But instead, what's really exciting is how we approach targeting and creative matching to understand what resonates with users. And then as you scale that, how do you proportionally adjust it to new markets? Are there different value propositions that resonate? Are there different emotional attachments different countries have to your brand that maybe don't work well in one market that do to another? So I think the key to success is being very targeted and organized. So I think having analytical background is great, but even if you don't, taking a step back and having a very organized and plan-based background where you set KPIs, such as these are the investments and these are the value of that, and then looking on a day-to-day performance optimization of maybe these color schemes work well, maybe these types of graphics resonate with this audience, and then mapping it to taglines. And once you kind of fit that market fit, there's this like really nice balance between product fit and audience fit that positions yourself as like an ideal market fit, which becomes like this really exciting place to start playing in once you match that.
Apologies for I'm right next to the road there. Everything's
Yeah,
fine.
that's
It's
good.
just they're just driving by.
Sure.
It's a very interesting observation you mentioned, which is that a lot of people do when they enter the marketing field, they do see themselves as creative, and I do believe that there's a level of creativity involved. But at the same time, you also mentioned the very left brain, right brain conflict of there being analytical tools and that sort of thing. We're gonna sidestep a little bit. So tell me, what are the skills you think a growth marketer needs? And maybe not specifically skills that can be learned, but maybe it's the aptitudes or the attitudes that you'd want a growth marketer to have. Speaking
Sure.
from your own experience and from your own hiring experience as well.
Sure. So typically, I don't want to like scare people in this meeting away from like if you're maybe
Hey, this is
a
the
little
truth.
bit.
This is the truth. People need to know
Yeah.
what they're getting into.
Yeah, I think it's really an awesome team. It's an awesome industry to join, right? But I think it's not to scare people that marketing is becoming less creative, because being creative helps your brand stand out. But in order to be creative, you need to put budget behind it. And in order for budget to resonate, it has to convert. So I think there's an interesting balance when looking into growth marketing and like what types of personalities fit. So I think very organized people perform really well, because especially when you work on scale, it's very easy to mistakenly spend a lot of money if you're on the performance side of a business and managing a channel. So being able to be hyper organized, a good multitasker, and then having the skills to communicate insights into actionable initiatives is also a really important match. And I think those are the softer skills very advanced growth marketers have. So being able to translate insights into personas, and then working with creative teams is very important. Working with product teams is really important. And I think once you kind of make that fix, you actually help drive the direction of your product. Exciting insights can be testing features before they go live in different markets to test like whether it's worth investments in different features. It could potentially drive new verticals of your business. It could also resonate with like larger campaigns and rebranding initiatives. So you can quickly test, color values and value propositions before really diving into that. So I think it's a very like left and a right brain mix that works well.
Yes, and if you search growth marketing, a lot of what tends to come up is growth hacks. There's always this one single brilliant idea, like you're giving away ice cream with your name card, or you're giving $10 for every sign up, that sort of thing. So I think it's very interesting that you described growth marketing in a way as a combination of data and creativity, of working with both not just the creative teams but also the product team as well. And you describe creativity as testing features, putting budget behind it, making a bet, but also seeing whether the results come in. That's very interesting. I did want to ask you a little bit, because you mentioned translating insights and communicating. Communication comes up a lot. How often do you report to your boss? And what does your boss care about? I think in general, marketing is fairly easily quantifiable. Does this number go up? Does this number go down? How much did we spend? Why did you spend so much? What are the numbers that when you talk as a growth marketer, as a head of growth, that your boss cares about? And that if somebody were to talk to try to apply for a position as growth marketing, I'll be interested in growth marketing. What are the numbers that they should report?
Sure. It also depends on the scale of the organization. In my previous role, I reported into the C-suite of very large organizations. So it's a bit more difficult to get time on their calendar. So we would do maybe weekly touch bases. At Easyship, it's a lot more of a flat culture, so there's a lot more interactiveness. But what it comes down to is revenue driven, right? At the end of the day, they want to look at what's the performance of acquisition, how is our churn in regards to health, right? So like, as opposed to only driving leads, are they healthy leads that drive revenue for the business and are qualified? And then the latter is maybe on a quarterly basis, understand segmentation of those leads. So we initially score leads. At Easyship, we score all leads that come in through an automated process that we've built, but understanding at the end of the quarter how that fits into like how we've mapped it to their lifetime values of an audience. So making sure that the investments we've made in the previous quarter are projected to not only return, but what's the projected value of them?
So we're starting to talk a little bit about the specific context for Easyship. So for those of us who are just following in, would you tell us a little bit more about some of the context and challenges of Easyship? I think earlier you mentioned that compared to at a company like Google or Facebook, where you're dealing with hundreds and thousands or millions of users, versus a corporate where there might be 10,000 users and you're focused on different things, versus at a startup where you're focused on laying down the fundamentals. Can you tell us a little bit more about the current, I guess, Easyship context? And when you're talking about laying down fundamentals and lead scoring, what are those fundamentals?
Sure. So at our core, Easyship's goal is to build a marketplace for borderless commerce. I think in addition to the value that brings, it also brings native challenges. Even in saying that statement, it becomes quite a buzzy statement that might mean different things to different people, right? Similarly to how growth marketing can mean different things to different people. So understanding how to explain our business in a very simplified approach to our target personas has been a unique challenge, at least to me in Easyship, just because logistics is super complex. So being able to, as a marketer, our jobs is to simplify, right? Like we need to get our point across in like 5 seconds or less. Because A, people are always scrolling, B, people's attention span is not long, and they need to like differentiate you from the beginning. So it's been a challenge, and one way we've addressed this is really focusing on key personas and building marketing tactics around it. And it's not looking at marketing tactics from one channel, but it's building actual pillars of marketing around different segments of our business that we find value. So like if I were to simplify that, Easyship is an e-commerce solution that helps e-commerce merchants is one vertical, crowdfunding campaigns would be another, developers would potentially be another, and then enterprise and fulfillment solutions. So if you're looking at these 4 verticals and how Easyship fits, our communication is different, our visual style has to be different, and then also how we share, our own use cases is unique. So it's really simple when you're looking at how you address this with paid channels. But when you're addressing it with organic channels or with companies with less budget, It's important to like be very focused on like targeted keywords, relevant white papers, working with partners that are thought leaders in the space to help build your association as a thought leader without, you know, stuffing it down the throats of like who would potentially be your end user. I think the key to being a good growth marketer is bringing authentic resources when a user needs it. So in building like an authentic approach, you need to always be accessible when a user is looking for this type of solution. So this could be in providing the right answers at the right time. So it's having a very effective SEO strategy. It could be working with the, you know, industry leaders in the space. So having a robust partners program. It could be and just like looking professional, so making sure you're relevant in all the right review sites and like your customer case studies tell the story you need them to. So it's really like building content and marketing around those key pillars help address that challenge.
And another question that might be a bit simple. Tell me a little bit about building personas. It's very interesting that you mentioned that you had 4 verticals, and the verticals were like developers, Kickstarters, companies of shipping, that sort of thing, as opposed to say board game companies, clothing companies, retail companies. It's interesting that you described your main verticals as different customer personas, or the people who might use Easyship. So I understand that you spoke about bringing authentic resources and delivering the information when they need it to the right people as well. So how do you understand these personas? Do you talk to them? Do you send your user research department? Do you get, you know, details from your customer complaint? How do you build these accurate personas and understand what they need and how to give it to them?
Sure. So an approach we did in persona testing is every year Easyship kind of does an annual summit where we bring together team members from all our offices across the world. Right now we have offices across 7 countries. So it's quite a big investment, but it becomes quite exciting when you can touch base with, you know, your CS team, your product team, your sales team, and kind of hear who are the merchants or who are they working with, who brings value. And then outside of that, we can also see, right? Like we have a robust CRM system. We categorize what type of categories we ship. So we're able to do an internal audit. So after doing our initial audit, we then validate it by our customer-facing teams. So that could be customer success, product, sales. And then with that, we kind of identify where are our key opportunities. I think to get as granular as focusing on, you know, apparel or verticals such as board games, it starts narrowing your target market. And although it can be a really good focus if, you know, you're just starting, when you pigeonhole yourself specific to one market, it becomes inaccessible. And I think that's when you have to position yourself as a thought leader in the space in a variety of spaces. And then that's where you start building, you know, brand stories that can maybe be more targeted, right? Like we do case studies with, you know, some of our clients are high-end apparel like Victoria Beckham brands, but then we also work with smaller brands that maybe are more localized and are more like eco-friendly story. And I think that type of resonance builds more trust than only focusing on like one niche market.
So, and it also sounds like this building of the persona is not just a marketing team thing or a growth marketing team; it's a company-wide sort of thing. So, I guess one of the statement that you made, which I really like, was as a marketer, our job is to simplify. It sounds like, and this is something that we talked about earlier. As a growth marketer, one of the things you do is to sell the importance of what you're doing and to you sell the entire company on the importance of building this customer persona and persuading them to kind of do this research and validate your personas as well. It's very impressive. So that's another soft skill needed if you want to be a growth marketer.
Yeah, I guess so.
So can I ask? So as you are head of growth at Easyship, Do you who sits under you? Is it a bunch of growth marketers? Is it a bunch of vanilla marketers? What's the situation on your team?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think growth marketing can be a very vague title. So within growth marketing, what that means at Easyship is inbound. So anything that's inbound at Easyship. So within my teams, it's the data team, partnerships, content, social, design, any team that you can kind of see outbound visual assets from Easyship and can build brand voice for the company sits under growth. And I think that's more to speak to the interconnectedness of all the channels.
Can I just clarify a little bit? You mentioned the data team. What kind of data? Performance marketing, customer data, or shipping parcel info?
Yeah. Currently, all data that comes through Easyship. Eventually, it'll build out into its own team, but just because when I joined, we didn't have a back-end like single source. And because it's so important and so integrated with how marketing should be built, the marketing team actually built the back-end data source, and Sense has brought in some data scientists. I think eventually it'll evolve into its own team. But that just, it is what it is for now. It's not typical of any organization, but it's just been the experience that's been at Easyship.
I asked this question because one of the questions that I was going to ask you was, so when you're building a growth team, what are kind of the people, the skills you're looking for, and what does your current growth team look like now? So it's very surprising that one of the first things you did was to build a data team that sits under the growth as well. So still the same question. What are the skills you're looking for, or what are the capabilities you're hoping to hit with your team as you build out your capabilities for growth? Obviously, you need some data. Obviously, you need some inbound content. What else? What are you looking for when you build a growth team?
So we actually are focusing on specialists. It's not so much that we're getting in. We have some more experienced hires, but typically, I think it's rare at startups. Like typically when you look at startups hiring, you can see they're like common phraseology, right? Like someone that wears many hats. And although that's a really exciting capacity, I think it becomes inefficient when you start looking at real ownership, and it becomes unclear when it starts looking at deliverables. And because we are so KPI and deliverable driven, we really try to build ownership so that eventually these people that start in these roles, whether or not they're experienced or out of university, they can grow with the roles and build skill set that they believe are specialized, and they become more and more specialized in. The goal with our company is to grow. I mean, we saw 200% growth this year. This year, we're projected to grow 300%, even outside of COVID. So I think it's really, we're trying to build a team that not only wants to grow with us, but wants to become an expert in their channel. So when I look at hiring for the content team, it could be, someone that's really content driven. They don't have to be hyper analytical. We can teach that, but what we do is we try to bring someone that's really passionate about their vertical and willing to grow. And with that, they're like softer skills, they're harder skills, or skills that aren't always resonating with that team, but I'm really driving data in all channels, including design and content, which is rare. But I think with that, it becomes a really exciting approach.
You mentioned something there which is very interesting, which is talk about specialization, and the content marketer doesn't need to be data analytical. We can teach that. So that's interesting. So as you mentioned, there's several teams: data, content, social. Is the role of the head of growth, or the head of marketing, or the growth marketer to sit in between these teams and to coordinate? So obviously the data person might not be able to explain what worked or didn't work on a social media post. A content person might not understand why they need to be able to adapt this based on data they pull. So are you the spider in the middle of the web?
I mean, I hope not, especially as we build teams at scale. But I think what my job is, and also that of like each other, is to help each other become better. And I think that becomes like an exciting thing as we build focused expertise. So there are things that should be in my role, right? Like building the foundation, building the structure that makes things accessible. So when you start talking about data, it doesn't have to be like we're not doing quant. Like it's not that it's so complex. We look at the same KPIs. So like for example, when looking at content, we might build a couple dashboards and like I might, categorize content categories and calendars in a specific way that makes it easier for our content writers to be able to pull their own reports. And what we do is an international team. So our team sits across 3 time zones. Most of our team sits in Hong Kong. We have half our team in the US, and then we're now opening a UK office. And with that, we do 1 stand-up a week with all time zones. And to be efficient, we use project management tools like Asana, but a lot of what we do are build the fundamentals to empower other people for success, as opposed to like being hyper reliant on like maybe one person. Because the goal, I think, of any manager is to eventually not be needed, right? So like you want to position yourself and your team in a way that they're growing and things are accessible to them. And then when it becomes more exciting for me is with the fundamentals being laid in place, then we can become more complex, right? Like we as a company are focusing very much on like last click attribution and what drives leads and revenue, as opposed to like the holistic mix and like looking at view through and like going, a couple steps beyond last click. And I think once you start setting the fundamentals, then the head of growth or the key marketing person can also start identifying attribution and building out a marketing mix that's maybe a bit more robust.
That's a very good that's a very good view of the role. The role of any manager is eventually not to be needed, and I definitely see the way that you're when you're talking about using content writers being able to pull their own reports from the dashboard. That's definitely something you mentioned, and it's something that's worth learning also, and helping team members grow and develop their own capabilities. I did have a question about one of the terms you used, which is building a team that scales. So I know that this is maybe a bit of a dirty word, but when you talk about scaling, both in terms of teams and I guess in terms of marketing, what does that mean?
Sure. Easyship, it's very easy. So our like goal for 2020 is to go global. So last year we operated in 6 countries. This year we've launched in 27 new markets. And by the end of the year, we hope to launch in 60 new markets. So our software is very agile. We have very lean budgets, so we need to focus on how to be relevant in different markets. So building teams that are scalable means markets are approachable. So being able to devise these kind of personas and pillars, that's why layering all these fundamentals is so important upfront, because now you're positioning yourself to understand what resonates in different markets. So when we're focusing on, a uniform pillar, so if we're saying we want to approach the e-commerce space in Western Europe, we can then get more targeted, focused on adoption rates in key markets. So we can identify, of these now 65 countries we'll be live in, maybe we'll have high adoption rates in 15. And then of those, we'll be able to develop strategies that really target value propositions that are relevant there. So as opposed to being the best at everything, it's really important to scale with focus, if that makes sense. So being able to aggregate these key like markets, key personas, and then focus holistically around them helps build scalability.
So it's not just a matter of tailoring a single solution that works only for this one specific person in this one specific place, but having an idea that, oh, in the future this may be, I may need to use this in several different places with several different people. That's very interesting. Okay, so we're getting close to the end of our session here. Thank you so much for sharing insights on growth marketing. I guess one good question to kind of lead off with, or to end on, is how did you get into growth marketing? And for somebody who might be interested in growth marketing, or maybe learning a little bit more and developing certain skills like that, what would be some steps taken towards that end?
Sure. I think I took a pretty straightforward route, in a sense that out of university, I studied analytics and marketing. Out of university, I was in consulting, which is very analytics driven, and it's quite boring. So moving to New York and being able to work in-house for a brand, it was always really important to me to kind of identify brand building with like insights. So that was kind of my route. So when I went to New York, my first job in growth was at WeWork. And I was very lucky to kind of help build out a brand when it was still very native and it wasn't what it is today. So I think for me, like for someone interested in going into growth, it's just being critical and thoughtful. I think it's being able to disassociate from like a brand and really take a step back and look at what can resonate, and always being inquisitive and always testing and always, trying to push for something better. I think that's what makes a really great growth marketer, is not sticking to status quo and like really identifying opportunities. And I think someone who's always questioning a brand, questioning adoption, looking to learn more, those are really the skills needed to become a great growth marketer, because everything can be trained, right? Like regardless of the company you work at, you're always going to use the same KPIs, regardless of like what, brand, whether it's B2B or B2C, you're always going to use the same channels. Maybe some are going to be more like website versus app focused, but you just have to be constantly questioning and willing to learn, and you'll be great.
That's a fantastic approach to it, being critical and being thoughtful. And you've covered all the definitions of both very well in your answer. Okay, I'm afraid that's nearly our time. So before we go, Jacqueline, would you like to share a little bit about how people can find you or send you their CVs or consult you for more information and more learning?
Sure. I think because I've worked on like social and branding for so many brands, I very rarely use my own. So I don't have a Twitter. People can reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's just Jacqueline Ostrov, and I am very searchable. Otherwise, they can email me, Jackie@easyship.com. And that's basically it.
Yep. And I've been Darren. Please read the Referral Candy blog, read the Candy Bar blog. If you've never heard of either of these blogs, I'm not doing my job right. But yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for your time.